You know that feeling when someone asks what you need and your mind goes completely blank? Not because you have no feelings, but because somewhere deep down you learned that your emotions were safest when they stayed quiet. There's a certain kind of person who can walk into a room and instantly sense how everyone else is doing. They notice tension before anyone speaks, feel responsible for keeping things calm, and apologize for taking up space even when they've done nothing wrong. A lot of people get labeled for this. Too sensitive, too distant, too emotional, too guarded. But most of these aren't flaws, they're adaptations. And many of them begin in homes where emotional maturity was missing in ways that are hard to explain unless you've lived through it. Emotionally immature parents don't always look harmful from the outside. Sometimes they were practical, hardworking, or even loving in certain ways. But emotionally, the child often felt alone without fully understanding why.
The confusing part is that emotional immaturity is rarely obvious. It's not always yelling or cruelty. Often it's inconsistency. A parent who became defensive when emotions appeared. A parent who expected the child to emotionally care for them. A parent who dismissed vulnerability because they couldn't tolerate it themselves. Over time, the child's nervous system quietly adapts. Psychology researchers have found that children raised in emotionally unpredictable environments become highly attuned to emotional cues because their brains are trying to maintain safety and connection. The nervous system learns to scan constantly. Tiny changes in tone, facial expressions, or mood start to feel important. This is why many adults raised this way feel exhausted after social interactions, replay conversations at night, or feel responsible for other people's emotions without even realizing it. Their body learned that emotional stability depended on anticipation, not because they were weak, but because they adapted intelligently to the environment they were given.
What makes this especially difficult is that many of these children grow into highly capable adults. Responsible, independent, deeply empathetic. They often become the calm person everyone leans on because they learned early how to regulate situations nobody else could regulate consistently. But underneath that competence is usually a quiet trade-off. They become deeply connected to other people's emotions while disconnected from their own needs. Rest starts to feel guilty. Boundaries feel selfish. Receiving care feels unfamiliar. And because these patterns began so early, they often feel like personality instead of survival. Many people spend years believing, I'm just anxious, or I'm bad at expressing emotions, without realizing these behaviors once protected their connection to the people they depended on most. Children are wired to preserve attachment, so instead of concluding, my parent is emotionally unavailable, the child usually concludes, something must be wrong with me. That belief feels safer to a developing nervous system than admitting the caregiver feels emotionally unsafe.
And this doesn't mean emotionally immature parents are villains. Many were carrying unresolved pain themselves. Many repeated emotional patterns they inherited without fully understanding them. A parent can genuinely love their child and still leave emotional wounds they never intended to create. Both things can exist at the same time. That nuance matters because this isn't about blame or deciding who was good or bad. It's about understanding what shaped the nervous system. Different children adapt differently. Some become perfectionists because achievement created temporary emotional safety. Some become invisible because invisibility reduced conflict. Some become hyper-independent because needing less felt safer than risking disappointment. No response is morally better than another. These are simply different survival strategies. And often, the deepest wound is not what happened, but what never consistently happened. Being emotionally seen, emotionally comforted, emotionally safe enough to exist without constantly monitoring someone else first.
The strange paradox is that many people raised this way become extraordinarily perceptive humans. They notice loneliness quickly. They understand emotional complexity. They can sit beside difficult feelings without immediately rejecting them. There's a depth that often comes from learning to emotionally interpret the world so early. But there's also exhaustion in constantly scanning for emotional shifts and grief in realizing how early self-abandonment began. Sometimes healing starts with nothing more dramatic than recognizing the pattern, without shaming it. Seeing these behaviors not as defects, but as intelligent adaptations created by a younger version of you trying to stay connected. Because beneath the overthinking, the hyper-awareness, the guilt, and the self-protection,
There is nothing inherently wrong with the person who learned these patterns. There is simply a nervous system that adapted carefully to an emotionally inconsistent environment. And once that becomes visible, something begins to soften. The shame loses some authority. The past starts to feel less like evidence of brokenness and more like context. And if this resonated in a way you couldn't fully explain, there are usually even deeper layers underneath it. Patterns people carry for years without realizing where they came from.